And that's what business owners do. They work their ass off until they have enough revenue to make a hire, and they try to make that hire in the best way that's going to grow the revenue further and improve the business. It would change the industry overnight if artists started to think this way.
You are now listening to the Creative Juice podcast, brought to you by Entrepreneur.io.
What's up, Indies? Welcome back to Creative Juice. This is episode 286. I'm so happy to be here with you today to continue our conversations around the music industry and money and selling and how artists can make more of it by doing more of that. I'm your host, Jack McCarthy. With me is your other host, Circa. Cirque, what's up, dude? I'm excited to break some brains today.
Yeah, I'm very excited today about this topic, and I think it's going to be short and sweet. I think we can get the message across pretty effectively, pretty quickly.
We've been talking quite a bit over the last few episodes, kind of doing this little mini arc here where we've been talking a lot about selling, what we're seeing going on in the music business, what we're seeing artists do when it comes to their marketing, how people are monetizing and how they're not. And I think that this episode will kind of all bring it home around why artists stay broke in a broken industry with a broken model. So I was pumped when you brought this topic sort of to the table to be maybe a little bit of the clincher to wrap up this little sales arc.
Yeah, I'm psyched.
Let's get right into it.
All right, yeah. So I've been an entrepreneur for over a decade now, and I've worked in a lot of different businesses. And then I've worked with a lot of music careers. Sort of all of my friends, Orlando has this big music scene, and there have been a lot of breakout stars from this music scene. And a lot of my friends have been involved in breaking into the music industry, getting a real taste of what it's like to be pitched by labels and managers and work with them. And I've advised a lot of careers outside of my friend circle that have that experience. And one of the things that's very odd about the music industry compared to every other business I've worked in, run, or consulted with is that the music industry, almost all of the working relationships, business to business in the music industry, as opposed to business to consumer, is that they're all based on percentages. So in the music industry, if you want a booking agent, they're going to get a percentage of your revenue as it relates to live shows and touring. If you want to work with a publisher, they're going to get a percentage of your intellectual property revenue. If you want to work with a label, they get a very large percentage of almost all of your revenue. If you want to work with a manager, they get a percentage of all of your revenue. If you want to work with, sometimes publicists are like this. If you want to work with a sync agency, they get a percentage. If you want to work with other forms of exotic rights collection agencies, they all get a percentage. So it's like, there's not a whole lot of key business relationships that an artist could need to form that aren't paid and denominated in a percentage of revenues. But let's take Entrepreneur as an example. We have a lot of business to business relationships. So we have a relationship with Facebook and Meta ads, right? And we pay a known cost for that relationship for the service they provide. We've worked with agencies in the past and we paid a known cost. We get t-shirts and hoodies printed to give as bonuses with some of our programs, and we pay a known cost.
We work with affiliates and we pay a known cost.
We work with affiliates. We have a website and we pay a known cost. We worked with a website design service for a little while and we paid a known cost. None of these relationships are percentage based. It's a very weird industry. And I think one of the main things that keeps artists, even very successful artists, relative to their success poor is this problem, is that it's all percentage based.
Yeah, it's a really interesting phenomenon because I, like you, have been an entrepreneur my whole career now. And the music industry is an industry where this is really the only place that you see it. You don't see this when you walk down your main street in your hometown or in your city. You don't see businesses that operate together. Here, let's take, for example, a painter that's doing painting work in a restaurant. He sure as hell is not working on commission based on the restaurant's sales volume since the day he finished a mural on their wall.
Yeah, it's funny because Sales is one of the areas of business that business owners are most comfortable with a commission, right? If you sell, you get a commission of what you sell. And in the music industry, everyone gets a commission and nobody sells.
It's so true.
Isn't that weird?
It's so true.
None of them are sales professionals and none of them are really that focused on sales. Another interesting one is distributors. Because, like, what's the easiest way to make money in the music industry? I'll give it to you. I'll give you the secret. Here's the easiest way to make a large fortune in the music industry is you set up a system by which you just end up getting even a small, even 3% of a large volume of songs and artists revenue. Because we're an intellectual property based industry. So if you get a claim, a percentage of future revenues of, a large volume of songs, then chances are a few of those songs are going to make it well worth your time to have gotten that. The collective, the total of those songs will produce revenues that make you a wealthy person. And this is why the digital distribution racket has been so interesting to watch, because you as an artist might see a new distributor pop up and they're offering all these additional services or all these cool little features, or maybe it's free. Maybe you don't actually pay an upfront cost for the distribution. And you might think that's cool. In my mind, I look at digital distributors and I look at what's their cost. Their costs are mostly one-time costs. The bulk of the expense in setting up a digital distributor is in the actually setting it up, not in the running it day to day. Because at the end of the day, a digital distributor is a glorified database. And my dad's a database architect going back to the 70s. So I know a lot about, computer databases. Let's say that.
You got a real database nerd on the show now, guys.
Yeah. And it's like the database logic is you can build in database logic, which is essentially automation that makes most of being a digital distributor automatic and costless. And so when I see a new digital distributor pop up, and as long as there's a percentage attached, a percentage of the distribution revenue goes back to that distributor, I kind of see it as like, oh, you've set up a new way to trap a bunch of IP and get a percentage. And really, that's what I would say a bulk of the music industry operatives, that's their game. They're not necessarily interested in the individual success of one artist or one song. That's not the game. The game is not to work your ass off to get one song or one artist big. The game is to get as many artists and as many songs into a percentage-based commission contract as possible, because that's almost a guaranteed way to end up with a healthy chunk of revenue.
Right. I mean, it's the same reason that labels post 2020, and it was happening prior to 2020 as well, but post 2020, we started to really see the ramp up of labels just handing out contracts en masse to every artist and every star that started to pop up or had any inkling of potential on social media, in the hopes that they could just have a basket of them. And, the few that rise to the top would essentially subsidize the risk that they took and make them a boatload of money in the process.
Yeah, it's kind of the problem with intellectual property is because what the government does when they give out copyrights is they give a valuable thing to a bunch of people who many of them do not understand what they're receiving. So they don't fundamentally understand IP, intellectual property, and the rights associated with it. So it's almost like giving a teenager $10,000. Like, what's going to happen to that 10K? It's going to go out the door, And I think that a lot of this industry is built up around capitalizing on that lack of education or lack of information that's given to the artist. Artists are given valuable IP every time they create. It may be more or less valuable depending on the future success of that artist, but to people who understand that game, it doesn't really matter. You'll see that the unit economics are such that the gains you get from trying to get an artist to be successful are outweighed by the gains you get from not trying to do that at all, but having a way to get a small portion of 10,000 artists' IP. In that scenario, if you get that percentage, you don't really have to work that hard to make any one of them, because in a cohort of 10,000, there will be one or two successes that make it more than worth your time.
It's kind of akin to bad private equity,
Yes, yeah. But what Jack's talking about, private equity, is just people with money who want to buy out a majority or a stake in private companies. So they'll buy shares. They'll either buy out the whole company or they will buy a portion of the company. And good private equity firm, like for instance, if you know Alex Hormozy, he runs a private equity firm. Acquisition.com is a private equity firm. And they're actually the opposite. They have taken active role in growing the revenues. They have a strict control of who they'll let in or who they'll buy a stake in because they want to be sure that they can impact their revenue. Labels are largely the opposite of that. They're trying to get as many applicants in the door as possible, or as many eligible artists in the door as possible, especially if they don't have to pay in advance. You'll notice that like the acceptance criteria for an artist goes way down as the advance goes down. Like, it doesn't really matter if there's not going to be an advance. They don't have to pay anything to snap up the IP, which is essentially once you sign a contract with a label that gives them a right to your future revenues, think of it for the label as insurance, because they lose if you blow up and you're not signed to them, but they win if you are signed to them. So it's like an insurance policy on in case you blow up. So yeah, like it is like bad private equity. It's like someone with money who's just like, I'm going to just buy a controlling stake in, 100 companies for as low as I possibly can. And then, the law of averages says that one or two of those companies will make it worth it.
The troubling thing about this in a number of other ways is also as an artist, you don't know the deals that are happening on the back end of those relationships as well. If we're talking about B2B, business to business deals between artists and labels or publishing houses or wherever the percentage deal is coming into play, if there's a services element involved in that, and there's likely a service provider who's then being contracted on behalf of the person that you're signing a deal with, you don't know what that deal looks like. That service provider may also not be incentivized to really care about what's happening to you. So if there's a services team, let's just pick on record labels a little bit more. If there's a marketing team that's being outsourced by a label, they might have a blanket deal with the label where it's like, okay, we quote unquote take care of your roster of artists, but they really have no vested interest in helping one artist succeed because the label and the people that you're partnering with don't have a vested interest in that really either.
Yeah. Yeah. It's pretty crazy when it comes to managers. We'll talk about that in a second. But another area we just keep finding more is merch companies. There's like 4 or 5 that I know of where the deal is, hey, you're an artist. You don't want to run your own merch. It's not like there's even that much money in merch. Like that's the theory that goes around. And so they're like, we'll run all of it. We'll print all your products. We'll set up a storefront. We'll do everything. And we just get a cut of your revenues. And the problem with that is that like, they're really not incentivized to grow your sales. They're just incentivized to hopefully sign on an artist who gets big, and then just their passive income, their passive sales of merch is a large chunk of revenue. And you can tell by the amount of effort that's evident when you go check out like, I don't want to name names, but like there's tons of them. Some of them have exclusive deals with Spotify in terms of serving merch.
It's really interesting in that regard as well when it comes to merch. You don't even have to go looking for them. I mean, I guess in some sense you do, but like if you go and sign up for some artist email lists, it will be rapidly revealed to you who the merch companies are, what they're doing, and the level of effort that goes actually into selling. And this goes back to something that Cirque mentioned at the beginning of the episode here about how in all of these B2B partnerships where there's percentage deals going on, in the business world, percentage deals happen often when it comes to sales and sales commission, but these deals are happening even with merch companies, and they're taking money off of your sales, but they're not actively assisting with the sales all that much or at all. And the degree of which they're doing that is, when they're doing it, is really questionable because look at the emails, dude.
Yeah, it's the storefronts are ugly as shit. The merch is low quality, and there's obvious things they could be doing to grow those sales numbers, but they're not because it's not worth it for them.
Dude, I clicked on a sales email last night from an artist, one of the artists from the 100 that I signed up for during our research round. If you didn't catch that episode, we'll leave a link in the show notes so that you can hear where artists on the Hot 100 charts are missing out on all sorts of revenue. But I was clicking on an email from one of those artists last night to bring me back to their store for a CD offer that they were running that sounded interesting to me, and I got stoked about it. It was their new record that was out. It brought me to a collection page on their store, and I didn't know, there was no way of discerning which product in the collection was actually the one that was being referenced in the email. And when I clicked around, there was a whole bunch of products that were sold out. If I was a fan that was trying to buy and I was interested in the copy that was in the email, and then I couldn't find out which product it was in the store, you know what I would have done? I wouldn't have bought anything.
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny because like there's a merch company that has like, I'm pretty sure the exclusive integration with Spotify. So if you want to have merch products appear on your Spotify profile, you have to be with this company. And just the storefront, the actual fulfillment and the quality of products and the just no-brainer things that they could do to increase sales by like 20 to 50% tomorrow are just not being done. It's effed up because it's like, there's no way, in case you don't know, if you've got a large audience on Spotify and nowhere else, it's very difficult to actually get value from that audience besides them streaming you on Spotify, because you can't message them on Spotify. You can't post and say something or put a link in front of them. You can't really do anything. So if they go to your profile and like, God forbid they go to your profile, because very few people even do that, even if they like your music. But if they do and you want to get them off, you would have to go with a third-party merch company to put your products on your Spotify profile. They control the data relationship, so I'm not even sure how easy it is to get like the email addresses of your customers. And then when they order something, the pricing isn't set by you. The quality of the product is not set by you. And the fulfillment process and the follow-up is not in your control. So it's like there's nothing you can actually do to impact sales there. And it's the only option if you want to get products on Spotify. So not only do you have to have a Spotify profile in the first place, which is the king of doing this, Spotify is the king of setting up a mechanism to get a large portion of your IP cash flows. But then you also have to sign up with this company. So it's really screwed up.
Thankfully, the days of that are waning. Now with the Shopify and Spotify integration,
Oh, yeah.
we've moved away from that reality.
Thank God, dude.
Yeah, we moved away from that reality. But for the longest time, that was it. That was it. It's still not great. The Shopify Spotify integration is just okay. It's not lighting my world on fire, I'll tell you that.
Yeah. And then, like I said, we just keep pulling out areas where this rule holds true. But all touring, enough of the touring industry that it's not worth mentioning the part that isn't, is controlled by Ticketmaster and Live Nation. And all you have to do is just look at what is their key business operations? What are the things that Ticketmaster and Live Nation have done? What are the great efforts they've gone to? Is it to make a better customer experience, to make tickets more affordable for artist fans, to deliver a better actual product? Is it to give artists more access to their fan data, make ticket pricing and selling easier? None of that. All the effort has gone into the biggest threat to their business model, which is people not using them.
That sounds like my Christmas list, first of all. So I don't know what you were reading, but
all the effort has gone into locking down as many venues as possible into contracts whereby they can control what artists play that venue. And then locking down pretty much any other avenue that artists could use to get around this Ticketmaster Live Nation regime. All the work has been put into making it impossible to avoid working with Ticketmaster and Live Nation. Why? Because not only do they get a cut of your revenues from touring, but they get to put fees on top of that. So they actually can increase their margin that they get from an average ticket sale by just putting in arbitrary fees. There's nowhere to look without seeing a percentage deal that is low effort. Not a percentage deal, like for instance, Indepreneur could sign on with an agency, a performance-based agency tomorrow, whereby they don't actually get paid until they lift our sales and revenue. And then they get a cut of the lift. There's nowhere in the industry that exists. It doesn't exist. There's very few places in the music industry that there's none. I can't name any. So A performance-based, lift-based contract where they get a commission on lift tells you that there's going to be a lift because they won't get paid if there isn't a lift, right? And so you can see that these percentage-based agreements in the music industry are not based off of the anticipation of a lift in revenues or a lift in sales. It's all about just it's a game of numbers. It's a game of averages. You won't see a whole lot of people getting a percentage of one artist or two artists. The goal is hundreds or thousands of artists and hundreds and thousands of songs.
You know what's interesting? Like, let's zoom out and contrast this to literally any other industry where truly high performing operators, they want to be paid, compensated, and compensated well. You know, you bring a CEO into your business or a COO into your business, and they're not going to come in just for equity alone, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. High tier operators do not want a percentage. And I mean, there are high tier operators who do want a percentage of lift. And that's because they see an opportunity where they can 2 or 3 or 4x your business and they want a cut of that. And that makes complete sense. And one of the places you would expect to see that, one of the places, and you can get this, there are managers out there, and I've even written contracts or edited contracts to bake this in. There's some managers where you can define a floor and you can say, this is what I'm making already without you. Anything above that, you get a cut of. So I helped one of my friends negotiate with a management team to cut out, to exclude anything he's already doing plus projected growth. So if he continues to grow at this rate, you don't get a cut of that. If it goes above that rate, if that angle of increase steepens, then you get a cut of that.
How did the negotiations go for that? Let's talk about that.
Yeah. So he was already getting like, I think it was 6 or 7K a month just from streaming. No touring experience, no merch. So it was all streaming. And they presented a contract that was part of a larger deal. And I was like, well, they're going to take a cut of what you're already making. And like, they didn't do anything for that. So we're going to come back and we're going to do a carve out clause that carves out your existing revenue plus your projected growth. And so we just sent it back to them with the carve out clause and explained it. And they were like, cool, we have no problem with that. Now, it was part of a larger deal that involved other artists. So if they weren't focused on that deal, they might have had a problem with it. But since it was just something they had to do for, basically, they were signing a group and this artist was a member of that group. And so they also wanted all their solo careers.
Huh.
Yeah.
Which points to exactly the phenomenon that we're talking about here, the basket of deals going on. And even in an instance where a better management agreement was being negotiated, it was done in light of the fact that there were shittier deals where there wasn't someone overseeing potentially the negotiations and the contract terms that could have, you know, then you've got let's say you have a basket of 10 artists and they all need to come together or the deal's going to fall through. Having to give some wiggle room and give one person a little bit more leverage and a little bit more opportunity in their terms, if it keeps the other 9 in the same spot, you know, probably okay by them. That's really interesting though, because it sounded like there was already, you know, there was plenty of opportunity for arbitrage and growth to be developed by that team. If there wasn't any touring revenue, if there wasn't any merch, those are 2 opportunities right there where they can, you know, help the artist, actually help the artist, and then take a commission off of that or take a percentage off of that rather than needing to take it leeching off of what the artist had already done.
Yeah, that's actually an interesting story because so in this group that was getting signed to management, there was, you know, many members of this group. And some of the members had a prior relationship with a manager, quote unquote, who had success in the industry already, who represented an artist who already came out of Florida and is already pretty well known, especially today. And they wanted that person involved. And then our friend from college was working at a management firm that had a few big names on the roster. They had a lot of experience, so they wanted them involved. So this management firm and this person who the other members wanted, they worked together and they were like, well, we'll co-manage you, which is entirely unnecessary to begin with. Number one.
This wasn't a main manager, day-to-day manager relationship. This was truly co-management.
Yeah, so they were going to all sign a big deal.
Got it.
Because and from their perspective, it's probably like, well, 10% of something is better than 0% of nothing, right? So like, they're not going to put up a fuss. But in my opinion, that management firm, which had a lot of industry experience, should have looked at what this other guy was pitching and been like, this is criminal and bad for your career, and you're not going to do it. And if you want to go with him and not us, that's fine, but we're not going to sign a deal with this dude. Because I looked over his paper, like their paper was fine, except for that carve-out clause. His paper was, what he was telling the group in their meetings was, oh, I'm just going to take half of the 10% you're giving management. But his contract said I'm going to take half of everything.
I remember this.
Yeah.
I remember when this was happening.
Yeah. So he told them one thing in the meeting and then sent them a contract that says literally the opposite. And instead of being called a management contract, it was called a production agreement. And these are rampant in the music industry.
Oh, yeah, dude.
Yeah.
Yeah. All over the place.
So production agreements or packaging agreements or packagers are people who sort of pose as managers. They LARP as managers. What they're really trying to do is essentially the same thing as what managers are trying to do for the most part, is they're trying to get you to a point where you're attractive to a label, walk you into a label, and then cash a check. They're basically just like, they're preparing you for a label negotiation. They have no interest in your success outside of getting you in that label door and signing a deal, because that's when they cash out. And it's all in an effort to lock up not only IP, but revenue. So yeah, we looked at this paper, which was insane. Like, not only was it 50% of everything, but it was like insane amounts of rights that were being asked for in this management contract. And like, if they didn't have a lawyer, they didn't have me looking at it, they might have signed like a deal that would have screwed over their whole career. And so the interesting part of that is that the other team, the management firm who like did have good paper, who we trust to like have the industry know-how, didn't say a word about this guy's paper. What does that tell you? It tells you that they don't actually have a vested interest in the success of this group long term, or they're just not paying attention. But it's like not a great sign.
Either option is not great.
Yeah, it's not great either way. And so that tells me even more that like industry managers who have big clients, like you know the people they represent, they didn't care to the tune of potentially signing away or letting an artist sign away 50% of their entire career. And that's just extremely alarming. So like management, I think, is the best argument for why it should be a percentage, because ultimately they're responsible, one would assume, of managing your business. So you're a personal brand as an artist. And so they get a cut of everything, because it's not just the intellectual property and the music. It's also the merch. It's also the touring. It's also TV deals. It's also everything they could get you. So you as a personal brand, they're supposed to be your business manager. So it makes sense that someone like that would get a cut of everything. That makes more sense. But you can see by the management firms that have just like miles long rosters, can't possibly focus on all of them. And like when presented with opportunities to get their artists more revenue, they seem to be disinterested. They seem to be more interested in walking them into a label.
Seem to? Seem to. That is a soft language, my friend. They are.
I'm being generous. Yeah.
I could prove that with recordings from prospect sales calls that are
Yeah, like we could tell these people like, okay, guaranteed this will raise your revenue, and it will raise your revenue so much that what it costs to pay us, there will be no costs. You will make money on this, and it's guaranteed. And they're like, yeah, but what can you do about X industry concern? It's like, dude, we're telling you you're going to make money. You're going to buy money at a discount. And it's guaranteed contractually, like, and they're not interested.
I had a conversation last week with a manager who was more concerned with trying to build culture in a list of fans than they were with trying to sell products. And while I can understand the sentiment behind that, it's a misguided idea when the bottom line of the business is on the line.
Yeah. So if I were going to give someone a cut of Indiepreneur's revenue lift, right, to focus on a specific area. Like let's say it's acquisition of new customers by ads. I would want them to have all the experience in the world and tons of success stories and tons of case studies and even an average customer success score to tell me they're really good at this ads acquisition thing, right? If I were going to give someone a percent of revenue lift in order to staff our team, so, identify key hires we need and then put them in place and find the people to go there, I would want them to have tons of experience in that. Now, an industry manager, an artist manager, is responsible for raising your touring revenue, your streaming revenue, growing your fan base, making you money through merch, sync deals, brand deals, all kinds of revenue.
Yeah, all sorts of partnerships.
Yeah, so industry managers have music industry experience. They have most of them, a large majority of them, don't have any business experience whatsoever. Taking a business from 0 to 1 million, 1 million to 10 million, they've never done it. That's weird. That's pretty weird. You sign over 10% of your revenues on everything to someone who has no experience whatsoever in growing revenues in that way. So yeah, it's a very odd industry. And there are managers I heavily respect who are good at looking out for their artist bottom line. We work with them directly.
I was just going to say, as we were having this conversation, I was thinking of a few people in particular who I'm like, they're not on this list.
Right. Yes, absolutely.
They're good people to talk to. Hopefully, what we've talked about so far, especially the strengths and weaknesses portion of when you're in the same way that if at Indepreneur tomorrow we were talking to potential partners about customer acquisition and revenue growth for our business, when you're discussing with potential team members, managers, partners, companies, whatever it might be, that the track record of the thing that you're asking them or hoping that they will do for you. And if you don't know, then you need to ask. And if they won't tell you, then you need to walk away.
Yeah, 100%. We get used to these ideas coming up as artists, learning about the industry, learning about how the deals work. We get used to it. We get desensitized to it. But I thought that it would be appropriate in this episode to just point out how truly odd and kind of fucked up the music industry is when it comes to this stuff, and to present the possibility of an alternative. We watched as Ed Isola, using marketing, grew the 502s from 0 fans to millions of fans, okay? That whole time, they didn't end up in a deal where they're going to give away a large percentage of their revenues from any source. And then when it came time that they really were overwhelmed and they couldn't do it all themselves, they actually hired somebody, right? They started hiring people. Now, they did sign with a manager, but I think it's instructive to point out that they went from 0 to millions. And when it came time to get key business services they're going to need, they looked to how can I pay someone for this service? Not how can I give away a percentage of my earning potential. Why? Because their earning potential was high. Ed's painfully aware of how much money the 502s can make as a personal brand or as a band brand, right? And so he's not going to give away a large slice of that for no ass reason.
Right. Exactly.
And that's what business owners do. They work their ass off until they have enough revenue to make a hire, and they try to make that hire in the best way that's going to grow the revenue further and improve the business. It would change the industry overnight if artists started to think this way.
It's kind of our central thesis, always has been. If indies can start to think like businesses, like small businesses,
yeah,
the industry will flip on its head.
Yeah. I think it's just crazy how much equity and revenue is given away to people who don't have that great a success record in even the label thing, much less actually creating lasting year-over-year revenues for an artist's personal brand. It's wild.
It really is. This is a great topic, and I think a great way for us to, like I said, kind of clinch the ending of this arc on money and sales and what you can be looking for in your business. Because this is where, when things start to move, this is where the sharks are going to start to come into the waters around your artist brand. So be paying attention.
Yeah, it's also if you're an artist out there, you're growing a fan base currently, starting to see signs of success, and it's getting out there, and maybe you're doing some successful shows, maybe a tour, maybe you're starting to sell online, or maybe streaming's taking off. Any one of these revenue channels, doesn't matter. you're going to come to a place where you're going to start getting reached out to by these people. I recommend that you listen, take the meetings, hear them out, but don't sign anything, because ultimately these people are out there trying to court artists, and the more successful an artist gets, the harder they're trying to court you. Look at Chance the Rapper. Him and his manager just took meeting after meeting as people tried and failed to get them to sign bad paper. And they got free gift after free gift in terms of like connections, dinners and flights and contacts for touring and all of this stuff. They just kept on racking up favors and never signed the deal. And you can do the same thing. Now, I will also say that because this is the modus operandi for this industry, there are corners of this industry that you cannot access until you sign that deal. So you cannot play at certain Ticketmaster or Live Nation venues unless you are a Ticketmaster Live Nation artist. You cannot get on certain festival stages unless you're working with certain booking agents. Okay? You're not going to get on the radio without a label. That's just off rip. And you'll notice that I can point out several times in history where artists, despite being huge on the internet, were never on the radio until they ended up either in a label deal or who they were signed to ended up becoming a subsidiary of a label. John Bellion's a great example. So there's just certain things you won't get, and they're mostly clout-based festival stages. You could be playing 1,000 cap venues sold out, and like you can sell shitloads of tickets and you're very popular, but you just won't get on that festival stage because you don't have the right booking agent. You could be tearing up the charts in terms of album charts and just never get on the radio. You can be number one and never get on the radio. And then press. Press is another way. It's another corner of the industry that's dominated by gatekeepers. And what gate are they keeping? You cannot come in this gate until you give us a percentage of your revenues. So don't be dissuaded, right? Don't be dissuaded from a direct-to-fan, business-focused path just because you can't get these clout points, because they're really not worth anything. Like, radio has its benefits. Festival stages have their benefits. But if you can sell, it doesn't really matter. So be aware that like there are parts of the industry that just won't pay attention to you until you're in one of these slave labor contracts. And it doesn't matter. You can get very, very far without ever being involved in any of that stuff. And you'll be better off for it because you actually have control over your revenues. So I hope that all makes sense.
Yeah, this is really an expose. All these examples pointing to the percentages, shedding light on the fact that like this hasn't changed. This has been the operating method of the music business, especially in the B2B relationships, really primarily in the B2B relationships between artists and their partners, shedding light on the percentages that really just kind of keep artists broke, that make the music industry money through intellectual property, and they gatekeep you out if you won't do it. The gatekeepers aren't gone. As much as the internet has blown up the ability to get music out to fans, I think you said it well, Cirque, there are plenty of things that the gatekeepers still stand in front of and say, nah, you can't get in. Like, you're not going to access this. That's the wall. It's good to be aware of it. It's good to know what you're up against. And I think you're right. Like, take advantage of the favors as they come to you. Take them in stride. Pay attention to what's being put in front of you. And that's kind of it. Use the rest of it for leverage.
Yeah, I'll leave it off by saying, you got a choice. Building your own business is hard. It's fucking hard, dude. I've done it. It's not easy, but it can be incredibly rewarding and motivating and fun. But if you're sitting there thinking, yeah, that all sounds too hard. Like, I'm just going to go with the flow. I'm going to sign up with all these people. I'm going to take any opportunity that comes my way in the form of a contract. Just remember, it won't be easier necessarily. Like, your chances of success do not go up. You have some doors open for you maybe, but you still have to work hard because they're not going to do the hard work for you. That's one. Two, by the time you get to that level of success, if you do, which you have 0.002% chance of actually getting there to where it's like a significant amount of revenue, 90% of your revenue is going to be owned by someone else. Unless you sign a label deal, then it might be more like 40%.
It's a dark picture.
Yeah.
So think about these things.
Yeah. If your strategy is like, that's cool and all, but like, I'm just going to go with the flow and I don't really care if they can make me a bunch of money, then I'll take the 10%. It's like, no, like 10% will not be very much money.
Yeah. Unless you rise to the 1% of artists.
Yeah. Let's risk adjust that 10%. Let's say you make a $10 million a year. 10% is 1 million. Okay. Now what's the risk that you won't get there? It's 99.998%. So what's 0.002% of $1 million? That's your risk adjusted return on going that path.
Yeah, pretty scary. We'll leave you guys with that. Hope you dug this. Hope you dug this. Hope this was helpful. Maybe a little bit of a money mindset shift and maybe a little bit of an education of what's going on in the contracts and the deals and the percentages and the dollars of the music business. Think about this as you move ahead in your artist career, in the career with your band, as you're working on partnerships, as you're building your team. Take this and run with it. Hope you guys dug it. We'll catch you next time on Creative Juice.
Stay indie. Don't sign anything.
That's right. Peace out, indies. And as we wrap up the show, you're listening to Taylor Bradshaw's Unkind. He's one of our Indie Awards winners inside of Indie Pro. If you want to be a part of Indie Awards and be nominated next year, join us inside of Indie Pro and enjoy Taylor's music.
Will you want to speak again? I don't know, let's take it a step at a time. I think you want to see him again. Yes, in fact, I know he's always on your mind. When I hold you, I break down now and then. Don't tell me I'm strong